to welcome you. So good afternoon and good evening to our speakers and to all. And welcome to the first ICAO panel on behavioral science. During the next 60 minutes, you will have the opportunity to hear from and exchange with eminent speakers. But before getting into what certainly will be the most exciting part of this session, we should try and answer a simple question, but it is yet an essential question. Why are we here? And as I anticipated, my presentation is frozen. So I will share my screen and try again. Maybe yes. So why are we here? ICAO is the United Nations Specialized Agency for International Civil Aviation. And in essence, it means that the 12,000 or so standards that allow for the safe, secure, efficient, economically viable, and environmental sustainable operations of civil aviation flights at the international level are developed at ICAO. And these standards are applicable to our 193 member states. And for more than 75 years now, ICAO experts have identified, assessed, and analyzed technological innovations. I will try and share again. Apologies for this. I think it's a good lesson learned to only have virtual meetings from home. So amongst all of the new areas of interest to our work, behavioral science has only emerged recently. And our session today is part of a wider strategy that the ICAO Secretariat adopted on innovation, and is also consistent with the mandate that our member states have given us, which is to get a bit closer to where innovations happen and also to create learning opportunities for all, including for the ICAO Secretariat. So in 2022, this will materialize through a range of landmark events in which our 7 regional offices are fully engaged. Of particular interest to you might be the Innovation Fair from the 24th to the 26th of September 2022. It will take place in a hybrid format, so you're welcome to also join us in Montreal. And it will feature a session on behavioral science. And the intent is really to build up on the knowledge that we'll gain today to expand the conversation and go and address our member states and other stakeholders. And honestly, I mean, we couldn't hope for a better lineup of speakers than the one that we're having this afternoon to get engaged on behavioral science. I said it for the first time. So please join me all in welcoming Dr. Tom Rader, Associate Professor, Department of Psychological and Behavioral Science at the London School of Economics, Dr. Carmen Feijo, Head of Behavior Detection at the Guardia Civil in Spain, and Dr. Victor Ubaid, Aviation and Space Psychologist at the German Aviation Research Institute, DLR. And I hope you will mind their less formal than usual pictures, but I couldn't resist, having pictures of you speaking to real people, which I think we're missing a little bit those days. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Dr. Rader. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. So I don't have any slides. I'm just going to talk a bit about what is behavioral science, which was the question I was asked to discuss, and how does it apply to aviation? How can it be used? So behavioral science in some ways is quite a new discipline that's emerged in the last 10, 15 years. And it's pretty, it's what the label says. It's about the science of behavior. But whilst it's a new discipline, it actually draws on many old and established discipline. So it's a mixture of many things. It draws on psychology, economics, decision sciences, ergonomics, marketing, biology, all sorts of different disciplines. And it ties them together to try and explain how people behave and how to change behavior. And that's really at the heart of behavioral science research. In the academia, it's relatively unusual, I suppose, in that much academic work is, one might say, a little bit of navel gazing, thinking about the science for the sake of science. Behavioral science is very much about change. It's about how can policymakers, organizations, individuals change their behavior in meaningful and substantive ways and in ways that matter. And fitting with its multidisciplinary nature, the ways that behavioral science is done is also multidisciplinary. Behavioral science research constitutes many different forms: qualitative, quantitative, big data, small data. So, for example, I think probably the trend in behavioral science that's often in a lot of demand these days is around data science, trying to predict how people will behave according to a particular environmental, organizational, situational constraints. Just think about something like the environment. There's an awful lot of data science work looking at how can we change change energy use. How can we get people to use a bit less energy? Can we design their homes in ways that they will be more likely to turn off the light? Can we design their bills and the communication with customers in ways that they will reduce energy? How can we, are there particular patterns of behavior observable in data collected at country level, societal level, that reveal that in some places people recycle more than others? And if so, like, what is generating that behavior? So part of behavioral science is kind of investigatory, using big data often to look at outcomes we're interested in that case, environmental outcomes, and looking at how data can inform and provide insight on behavior. But it also, behavioral science can also be very micro. So if you think something like heuristics and biases. So there's a big area of research in decision sciences that looks at heuristics and biases. And these are basically implicit rules that shape how we think, shortcuts of the mind. And you're probably familiar with something like the anchoring effect, which is where if you see, I know a bottle of wine and somebody tells you that bottle of wine's worth £30, your mind, when you look at that bottle of wine, will be anchored at £30, regardless of whether its true value is £5 or £50. That's your sort of starting assumption. And that starting assumption will shape how you negotiate and how you treat the object. Now, that's quite a powerful assumption. And behavioral scientists are interested in, well, can you kind of help people to be a bit de-biased? Can you help them to, can you create situations, scenarios, environments that allow them to look at a situation afresh and differently? And so you can go from sort of the big data side of behavioral science all the way down to, and there's a lot of work on say health, how to get people to eat a bit more healthily, to the micromanagement of people's health. So if you give people smaller pieces of cake, they're likely to eat less cake than if you give them large slices of cake. They won't take 2 pieces of small cake equivalent to 1 large cake. They'll just stick with the one. It's a very small and basic, trivial insight, but actually quite powerful, because if you're interested in, well, how can you shape behavior? How can you get people to eat less? Well, small portions. And can you design that? And of course, there's all sorts of politics around that. And that's quite close to what we call nudging in behavioral science, which is the idea that you can shape people, influence behavior through sort of small shifts in the environment, that pushing them one way or the other way. Social norms is also a big part of behavioral science. And this is the idea that we tend to engage in behaviors that we think are normal and expected of us. And there's a lot of very powerful research showing that, for example, if you shape what clinicians think is the norm in terms of prescribing antibiotics, you can influence how likely they are to prescribe antibiotics in the future. And that contributes to things like the antimicrobial resistance crisis. So that is, antibiotics getting less powerful through time. So we need clinicians to prescribe fewer of them. And so there, what you have is scientists of using insights from psychology, decision sciences, economics, to try and influence behavior in the real world. The other last aspect of behavioral science that's quite powerful is the idea of randomized control trials. So behavioral science doesn't just try to explain why behavior occurs. It also tries to look at, well, what kinds of designs are most effective in behavior. And actually, we're encountering randomized control trials designed by behavioral scientists all the time. Every time you go onto Google, some people will be getting an A page and other people will be getting a B page with the words slightly different, or the font, or whatever it is. Search is being presented slightly differently. And they'll look at, well, are people more likely to click a nanosecond more quickly on one search than the other one? And it's the same with Facebook and all these other organizations. Continually through A and B testing, that's randomized control trials, looking at, can you shape, can you create environments and situations that are a little bit more effective in getting the behavior you want, that you desire. And of course, people do this inside of organizations. They do this with, for example, looking at recruitment. What happens if you have blind recruitment, which is where you can't see people's names, versus named recruitments? And people run randomized control trials to look at, well, what are the difference in terms of outcomes in recruitment? So behavioral science is it's a big topic because it encapsulates so many different disciplines. But at its heart is a desire to try and invoke change, usually at an individual, institutional, policy level. It's not without critique. So it's been used a lot by government. We saw a lot of behavioral science in the pandemic, with behavioral science being used to get people to wash their hands, to wear masks, to take vaccines. And also there's critique of behavioral science that sometimes it can look a little bit sinister, that people are being pushed into behaviors that they may not necessarily know about or opt into. But it's without doubt a powerful area. Thinking about behavioral science applied to aviation briefly, actually aviation's been doing behavioral science for an awful long time. It's not new in aviation, it just hasn't really been called behavioral science, I don't think. So if you think about something about the ergonomic design of a cockpit, that has behavioral science written all through it. Alarm systems, lights, controls, all of these things, the design of the seats, the positionality of where co-pilots and pilots sit. These are not randomly designed. These are through studies of behavior. Often not, perhaps you might say, as rigorous as a behavioral science study, where there has been A and B testing, and perhaps that's something aviation might wish to do. But certainly at that level, just something like ergonomics, behavioral choice architecture is the term, the behavioral science term, the choice architecture of a cockpit, airline cockpit, or the control panel an air traffic controller works from, is very much behavioral science. Training is another example. Crew resource management is a great example of a behavioral, probably one of the most effective behavioral science interventions ever instituted, I would have suggested. But here it's about the behavior and the science of how people interact together. Although we don't think of it as a behavioral science intervention, it is and has been. With scholars and practitioners looking at the most effective types of behavior for managing emergencies. And perhaps the last one to think about is culture, which is an area that I do a lot of work on, organizational culture, which is of course all about norms and values and what people think is normal. And there's a long tradition in behavioral science work around norms, norm setting behaviors that are prescribed and acceptable and desired. And in the field of aviation, people have been studying culture for a long time. And it's long been recognized that, say, norms on incident reporting, and how do you get people to report incidents where maybe they don't have to? Well, this is all about culture. And that dovetails very closely with behavioral science. But in all of these things, whether it's ergonomics, trainings, culture, I think there's a lot to learn from behavioral science, in particular the rigor and use of data that is used to come up with conclusion and to develop interventions. And I think that's the part of behavioral science. And also some of the theory behind why people behave. That's probably the part that will be most useful going forward. So I hope that's given you a little overview of what behavioral science is and just some of my thoughts on how it can apply to aviation.
Thank you very much, Edith. I think you've run us through the BABA, the basics, of the important concepts in behavioral science, and already linking it to some of applications in aviation. It's a perfect segue to our second presentation about the rigor and the data collection that will then inform your interventions, because this is exactly what Carmen will share with us. But already, are there any questions? I mean, there will be an opportunity at the end, of course, to ask questions to our speakers. But if anyone, feel they want to react to what Tom said, I mean, they're welcome to do so, or to post as Kieran invited them to do so on the chat as well. So I see none for now, but we are now then moving to the presentation from Carmen. You've seen, Carmen, that I will do my best to make sure all of this runs smoothly, but I can't guarantee 100% success rate on this one. But let's give it a try. Okay. Thank you very much and welcome.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation. Of course, it's a pleasure for me to be here today. Well, following up the conversation and the issue of behavioral science, this is a very wide topic, but I'm going to focus specifically on the very, very little part of it that is regarding behavior detection in an applied context that is within civil aviation. So what can we, how can we explain and how can we train people and just in order to have an idea of what they are looking for. So let's say that I will cover, first of all, the origin of behavior detection within this specific context, that is civil aviation, and apply to aviation security. Of course, about the ICAO definition of this concept of behavior detection, the three main pillars of behavior detection, some of the scientific research that we have in this specific field, some of the main results and about detection and interview process, some small points regarding training, because I think it's very, very important, and just some general conclusions, final conclusions. So let's move to the next. Sorry for that. Okay, just. I want to move, but I cannot.
Sorry, I promise. I promise. I'm
Sorry. Sorry, just trying to move, but I can.
So I can do the stop share, and in the meantime, there are questions actually on the chat. So I think the first question, Tom, is related to your intervention, and there is an interesting one on a simulator, difference between simulator and plane that might be actually better suited to Victor. But Tom, if you would like to take the first question while I'm trying to sort out the technical issues.
Switch on your mic, Tom. Okay, he's out or somewhere.
Yes.
I see this one question: how different is flying feel in a simulator of an actual airplane in various categories of vehicles? The thing that I can answer or add to this question is that we have some research experience with the immersion effect, putting people in virtual reality circumstances and then understand whether they behave different from real world experience. And what we found out is the same that pilots and instructors told us about their regular simulator screening and training events in all their career, that you forget it after some minutes or even after some seconds that you are sitting in a simulator, not in a real aircraft, especially when it comes to high workload situations, like when you train an emergency situation with, fire on one engine and avionic smoke or this kind of situations. Then you're so focused on the task and understanding the environment, then you absolutely forget about that it's just a simulation. That's our experience and the result of our research. Does that answer the question?
To me, it does, but I'm not the one who asked it in the first place. So if our colleague, feels there is more to it, then they're welcome to step in. Perfect. So in the meantime, and I can thank very much Kieran for stepping in as technical support there. He will be sharing your presentation, Carmen, so we should be able to run it smoothly. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you very much, Victor, for answering the question.
Okay, so I want to move on to the next slide, but again, just okay. Thank you so much. Now we are in the right position. So, just first of all, I think it's very important to understand the origin and the why we have right now behavior detection within our context, and the origin that was, if we look back, we have at the beginning we have like different security measures that were really reactive in nature. So we have specific attacks, and then we include a new measure. So we can consider the most part of them are predictable. So if you have a look at the screen, you can see the shoe bomb from Richard Ray, the plot with liquid explosives in London. So at this moment, what we have is a number of security measures that are to some extent predictable. They are not flexible. So at the end, it's like, well, I have to go through different airports and the security measures are mostly the same. Of course, there's a lot of money invested in new technology, and like the final user, that is the passenger, the image where we're sending the passenger is very poor. So of course, and every time I go through an airport as a passenger, I say, well, my God, this is like a mess. It's very complicated, and from time to time there's a new measure in place. So taking into account the situation, the thing was, well, we need to move from reaction to something more proactive. And that is the reason why we started to think about behavior detection. It's not just waiting, but doing something while we are waiting. So can we move to the next? Thanks so much. So it took a lot of time to have something included in the general regulations and in the international regulation, but the definition of behavior detection, you can find it in the Annex 17. So it's for me, it's a very comprehensive definition. So it's the application of techniques. So it includes the recognition of characteristics and of course not limited to just physiological or gestural signs, and that indicate us that is something anomalous is in there. But the only thing that I missed when I was reading this definition was, well, what should we consider anomalous? What is an anomalous behavior? What is normal and what is not normal? So I will come back to that later, but by now this is still a recommendation, and also there is specific BD chapter included in the doc 8973. So we can find some legislation regarding behavior detection. So can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So first of all, to understand what is behavior detection within our context, we need to understand that, first of all, there are like three main pillars supporting behavior detection. That is, first of all, the observation. So you have a context, an environment. So first of all, you observe, you take into account the time, the moment of the day, the season, the person itself, and the scenario. So you can assess, so you can baseline the scenario. So this is the first important point. Then the second pillar is the detection. So you have to look for something different in that scenario. So it is the detection moment. And of course, if you detect something, then you have to interview of commonly known as a kind of resolution conversation, and then to finalize with on a specific resolution that is going to depend on the different internal procedures. So can we move on, please? Yep. Yep, to the next slide. Thank you so much. So coming back to the concept of anomalous behavior, of course, we consider we need more scientific research on this, because at the beginning was a lot of criticism. So not only to give support, but also to define, to have clear definitions about, for instance, what we should consider an anomalous behavior. So this was like my first step. So first of all, before starting a scientific research, I decided to define what we should consider anomalous behavior, and it's no more than something unexpected. So first of all, you need to be familiar with the context, and then is the moment you can detect something that is different and unexpected. And of course, does it mean that if something is unexpected or anomalous is at the same time something illegal or something criminal or linked with the criminality? Of course not. Sometimes something unexpected can be something clear, easy to understand, and we can find something plausible explanation for that specific behavior. So that was the reason why I tried to avoid words like suspicious or hostile, because that is something very specific. And when you have a hostile person in front of you, the reaction is completely different. So that is the reason why I try to avoid those specific words. So can we move on to the next slide? Thank you so much. So again, and as the previous speaker mentioned, behind behavior analysis, there are a lot of very important theories. But in our specific field, we can mention like two main theories. The first one is the theory of mind, is that like our ability to understand and predict the intent and behaviors and emotions in others. So this is like one of the main theories behind. And the second one, and also very important, is the self-regulation theory. And this theory postulates that people activate cognitive and behavioral strategies to pursue desired goals or even to avoid punishment. So these are like the two main theories behind, but of course there are much more than this. There are also some criminological theories linked with this, but just to understand and to make people understand that this is not just a scientific design with no theory behind. It's completely the opposite. So that is like our framework to design something like this. And in our case in Spain, we decided to design a model that reflects the way behavior detection officers work. It is, first of all, to observe and detect. So first of all, we analyze those anomalous behaviors. On the other side, we also analyze specific items during the interview process. Of course, I think it was a scientific research. I also include a personality test, but I found nothing, was no significance. So just for you to know that it was much more than just detection and interview. And of course, like the final phase was just the screening. So we need to know if something was happening or not on that specific design. So as usual, we have a randomly selected group that is the control group. And on the other side, we have people decided due to a specific behavior item. So that is like our comparison. So can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So to our surprise, we find significant results. And regarding not only the anomalous behaviors, we found that some of the patterns of movement, like changes in position, direction, and speed, were really significant. But not only significant, because you can have something significant but not predictive. So we analyzed what we call the effect size, and they were highly predictive. So people that were committing illegal activities to some extent. So we found that with not only with the patterns of movement, but also with patterns of communication. So where they're looking at, if we're just, for instance, looking at police officers or, things like that. So again, we find interesting results in there. And also regarding the interview process, we analyze items linked with the credibility and also with deception. And in both cases, we find significant and interesting results. But what was more interesting for us was that we found out that there are specific techniques that in our field works really nice. For instance, the unexpected questions worked really nice in our context. So that was, apart from the results in the research, we get much more than that. So it was really nice. So can we move to the next slide, please? Well, and it's not only the results regarding the research, the scientific research. Of course, the most important part is with those results, you can design and you can elaborate a training program for you, and you can adapt your training program to your needs, depending on a specific entity or organization, depending on the environment, depending on the specific needs. So you have a lot of information, not only from the results from the scientific research, but also from the experience. And the experience is very important because you made a lot of mistakes. So when you made a lot of mistakes, you learn from the experience. And of course, something that I always recommend to the rest of the people, you don't need to train all the people as experts. Because something that I found out was that a lot of people going through the same training process, at the end, they don't reach the specific level. Some people were really good at the end, but some others were not so good. So this is, again, from our experience. So you can adapt to your training, and of course, on the need-to-know basis, you can, for instance, create something regarding awareness, or you can do it maybe online courses. So there's a lot of options to design specific training within your organization. And of course, something that I really recommend is don't forget the trainers, because sometimes we train trainers, but we forget that these people in general are not regular trainers, are not teachers. So they in general don't know how to explain, how to make people interact with you. So how to arise the critical thinking in people, and it is very important in our context. So that's just general recommendations. So can we move to the last slide? So just as a general conclusion, just keep in mind that VD technique is very flexible. You can adapt the technique, you can adapt the training to the different scenarios, entities in different levels. So it's very flexible in general. So just keep in mind that you need the specific human resources. So in terms of knowledge or availability, of course, the commitment of the different entities, because sometimes you try to coordinate your organization with different entities in the airport, and that this is very important, the cooperation and collaboration. And something that is like a key point in here, the quality control, very, very important. Not only the technique, but the video's performance, the trainers, and the training process. Everything should go under the quality control. Don't forget that. And of course, a constant updated materials, because we are a group of people working on these. We have new research, we have new results. So it's very important to update everything. And of course, don't forget to collaborate, because there is a very interesting part that is we can collaborate with different organizations through workshops, conferences, with formal training, sharing experiences, good practices. So everything can be shared. And because we are in the same place, in the same line, so that is very interesting. And and of course, from a perspective of a researcher, we have a lot of things to do behind in front of us, and there's a lot of research waiting for the time and everything. So this is more or less the general idea, and very brief, but at least you have an idea of BD within this context.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for this very insightful presentation. I do have a couple of questions, but I would like to wrap up the presentations and also give the privilege of participants to ask their questions. It's been extremely interesting to listen to your experience, so thank you very much. Dr. Obaid, Victor, if you're ready, then the floor is yours for your presentation as well. You have to unmute, please. Thank you.
Okay, now it's better, I think. Great, and I hope you can see my slides. So I really try to find a bridge between the first two, points that Tom and Carmen made. You focus on the behavioral plasticity and the observation of behavior. Tom, you described that we have a capability to adapt our behavior, and that's part of behavioral science research. You are absolutely right. But Carmen, on the other hand, you said you really presented us that you have to look for those who can benefit most from training, and that's my work and from my colleagues. Our main aim is to identify those people who will be able to do a good job in the cockpit or air traffic controllers or as astronauts for their whole career. So our aim is to prognose a time frame of, let's say, 30 or 40 years of behavior. And that's really difficult. And you have to clearly understand what part of the personality is something like predictable and what not. And there's plasticity and there's gain of training and everything, but there's still something which is really stable, some traits and some abilities that you cannot change, although you want it, of course. I was thinking how to, or what major points are important maybe for you. And I think it's better to understand what we do when you understand how we do it process-wise. And what we always do is, first of all, we have to understand for what we have to look for. What are the requirements for that position or for that training or for that job in that certain company? And you always start with a so-called job requirement analysis. That's an empirical way to understand and to ask the experts, in this case, the pilots, the airlines, what is important for your job to be a successful pilot in your company? And then you have a list of abilities, of personality aspects, of competencies, and then you try to find, an empirical mean of that, and then you arrive to categories like cognitive abilities, psychomotor capabilities, sensory and perceptual abilities, and social and interactive competencies. So that are the basic categories, you can say. And what you can see here is the result of a survey that I conducted with my colleague Joachim Barendorf, who is a 747 pilot and instructor at Lufthansa German Airlines. And what we asked 230 of his colleagues. And we found out that the majority of the pilots named psychomotor and multitasking skills as the most important in terms of being a successful and reliable pilot. And this is really interesting in times where you have more and more automation in aircrafts. And then we asked pilots, so that's a little bit surprising because we expected, that social interactive skills are a little bit more important than the pure psychomotor skills. And they said, no, it's just the opposite. Because of this automation, we don't need our skills so often. 1 minute in the beginning, some minutes at the end, and that's it. And then you fly over the Atlantic for some hours. And that's automated. So we have to have a good level of the skills in order to activate these skills just in a second. And therefore you need more from these kind of skills. And therefore we gained these results. That was very interesting for us. The more interesting was what we found then. We then tried to compare the different fleets and airlines in this whole group This was a Lufthansa Group survey. So in Lufthansa Group, you have many airlines like Eurowings, Lufthansa CityLine, and Austrian Airlines, and so on. And they fly different type of aircraft. And so we were especially interested in when you have the same airspace and the same operation, short, medium haul, but different aircraft, for instance, an A320 or a B737. And then we found some differences. And you see the yellow bar here always. This is the 737. And this is a conventional old-fashioned aircraft, you know, low level of automation. It's the classic one. It's not the new one and not the NG. And so therefore, it was very good to understand, easy to understand that they have some more or higher level, they request a higher level of abilities and competencies on this aircraft, because you have to be more aware. It's more like a sporty aircraft. It's not like a computer like the Airbus A320. That was interesting. But then we asked more deep. We said, okay, there are some aircrafts in your whole group or some fleets or some airlines where you fly the same aircrafts, in this case, the A320. So you have the same training standards, you have the same airspace, you have the same operation in the same area and the same aircraft. And still, because we have two companies in that whole group, they still differ in their requirements. And that is a very important, maybe also a summary of these results, that you really have to look for this basic job requirements in that special airline that you're working with together, or in the flight school, or in this group. You always have to be aware that it's not like it's very clear what the pilot has to do. It's always the culture of the company, the operational environment that they work on, and the group of pilots that they're in this company. And it's a very simple example is, I think, makes it easy to understand that now pick up a small company with, let's say, 2 aircrafts. You may have around 20, 25 or something pilots, and they're all new from the barbecue in the summer. So they know this guy is always a little bit loud and, you know, he likes to have an argument, but he's a good person, and she's really a very nice person. You know them. You don't have to, you know, to adapt to someone, because you know already how to adapt your experience with these people. But if you're in a large company, 300 aircrafts, maybe some 1,000 pilots, then it's a different story. Maybe you meet the person never again in your life, but now you have to fly, to go for a rotation for 2 days, and then you never meet again. So you have to adapt easily. So the necessary level of social competence must be much higher, significantly higher than in the small company with only 2 aircraft where you meet at the barbecue. So we always start with this kind of requirement analysis, because they have, of course, effects of gender, nationality, and also additionally this all operational aspect that I already mentioned. And then you have to build up a selection process. I just run through the slides now. I hope that you can understand that also later when you get this slides, or when you see the record of this meeting. This slide only wants to show that you have to compress the whole set of these items, these questions that you ask the experts. This is on the left side. It's just black that you don't have to see it now so much, or you don't have to put so much attention. You compress it to a lower number of categories that you can translate then into a selection scheme. And we focus on 3 main aspects. That's consistent, effective crew member. This is the basic abilities that you're looking for, like sending people to basic flight training. You have to have some cognitive skills. You have to be some sensory abilities just to understand what's happening around, to read the cockpit and your panel. And then you have to have some operational skills, which makes you, you know, doing the right thing and adapting with your psychomotor, hand-eye coordination to the aircraft. And on top of this, you have the airliner qualification. That means, will you be able to be a member of this company, an employee? Will you adapt to the certain company culture? So will you just be a part of that team? And we always conduct our selection process in that way, that we look for these 3 aspects. but we always start with at-home test training, because it's a major problem in psychological testing that all tests can be faked. It's just the reality. So whenever you meet a psychologist who says you cannot fake our test, don't trust him. That's my advice. You must find countermeasures against faking or improvement. I don't say something against training and test preparation. That's fine. I'm fine with it, absolutely. And I understand that people are motivated, to do everything to get it. That's really a sign of good motivation. But the problem with most preparation is that's commercial. And that means when your parents are wealthy, you can attend a course for test preparation, and then you will be better. So the poor one will not, maybe with the same skills, he will not be out at the end of the process with a positive result. And so we are a research and nonprofit organization. So 20 years ago, we said, okay, let's put all our tests online, one-to-one. We are not a company. We don't have to make money with this. We just want the best and the fair and the culture fair result, so that all of our participants have the same chance at the end of the day. And despite the fact whether parents are rich or if you're from that part of the country or there. So, and we, of course, we investigated it, and you see, for instance, one publication from my colleagues about the measurement results of this. So we measured how the training of our tests affects the test results at the end of the day. And what we found is that with the test training that we provided, which is easily accessible for all, you only have to download it from our site. There's no tracking of something. You don't have to register for something. You get the download link when you're an applicant, when you're a validated applicant, then you download, you start training, and there's no record or something. We're not interested in the data itself. What we were interested in this publication was when they came for the testing, we asked them, how often did you train? How often did you use that, for instance, like this for the technical test or for memory capacity? How often did you do it? And we found a very strong correlation between test results and, of course, the number of test training trials. And the good thing is there were no gender differences, there were no cultural difference anymore. So we were really able to look on the skills, and the whole distortion was different levels of test preparation was really, it was out. And that was a great result for us. And so we are still on this track since 20 years. We offer all our tests online. And I think it's the best for our candidates, and they have equal chances. This is just some screenshots from this testing. Then you arrive at the DLR, you do the testing. We have also some test stations somewhere else in the world. We are still observing this aspect of online ability testing. It's still not as valid as presence testing. And therefore, we are still a little bit, we are not all in this for this idea. We wait a little bit. There are many questions scientifically that we have to, we have to find an answer because we can go for before we can go for that. So for the time being, we do this, in presence in our testing facility where we have full control over the test situation, and that's even a very important point, and which is still a problem in online testing. You never know about the environmental condition of the candidate. Is there noise? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it windy or whatever? This is all something that is not acceptable for psychological testing, and you cannot control it. And then you lower the chances of your candidates, and that means that there's a lower positive rate at the end of the day. And that's not what the airlines want. Very easy. And then we have the, in our assessment flow, we have the operational skills. We have it's called, you could call it a procedure trainer for unexperienced persons just leaving school, applying for flight training, or we work also together with flight instructors in the full flight simulator. And the last stage of our selection is always full computer-based behavioral observation, because it's much more reliable than only, taking some notes from that what we see. And of course, a semi-structured occupational interview at the end to understand the person's motivations, to look a little bit into the biography, and especially to bring everything together, whether there's a company fit at the end. As a research organization, now this is my third last slide, we always have to prove what we do. I mean, no one hires a psychologist for fun. So we have to prove that it's a good idea to hire us. And what you can see here is just look on the right bar, which is more or less green. And this is the outcome of the selection process with the Lufthansa. And they have really no problems in captain upgrades. And only 5% of the pilots in their whole career until 65 have sometimes some behavioral problems, or are not able, being a captain on the first attempt, going there for a second upgrade training. This is it's less than 5%, you can say, and that's a very economically powerful number for the management in that company. So if you look on the industry standard, you have absolutely other numbers, and this is you can just translate it into money. Yeah, this is the way that how we do it. Maybe only 2 short notes. I see the time running. We are also in depth in research together with engineers on single pilot operation and single pilot cockpit. We see some problems still not answered yet. And I ask myself, when you start with single pilot operation, you start with captains. You don't start with co-pilots. How will they be educated to be a single pilot one day? Or will you stop this career idea that there will be a captain or commander? Will it only be an assistant? I think there are many aspects that have to be defined clearly and found out where are the safety issues then. And one very important aspect is the aspect of social isolation. And this is a common finding in psychological research, that social isolation has a very negative effect on mental performance. And the question is, what people will benefit from an artificial intelligent partner or a remote co-pilot somewhere on the ground, and what people will not. So, and there's these kind of personality differences that you cannot train some people to arrive where you want them to arrive. And the last one that I want to stress is the artificial intelligence and man-machine interaction. This also in depth a little bit into the single pilot cockpit issue. If you look a little bit further, there's no problem in the lab to build up an artificial intelligence or to take a cargo flight from Munich to Hamburg by night. There's no traffic, there's nothing that you are affected, there's no military traffic, so you can organize with one flight, it's no problem. But now please think of this of millions of flights. And the whole questions of data security, data transmission, redundancy, threats, I think there are many questions, still many questions. And as I'm working in a very large engineering research organization, I have many friends who are engineers. I always say, okay, have you ever thought of this? I know that you really want to build up these very beautiful machines and these artificial intelligence devices, but have you ever thought of this? Okay, so these were my last words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victor, for this excellent presentation. And I see already questions, being posted in the chat. So it's great. We only have 5 minutes or so, but we hope to be able to continue the conversation. Maybe everyone can attend, the Innovation Fair in September. So without delaying anymore, so we have a question. So first question was from Ananya. So while company cultures defines which skill to prioritize, has the job-seeking behavior of pilots also been studied according to which skill they prefer? So that's a question for you.
We asked flight students in the beginning of their training, what they expect to be being a good pilot. What is, like if they prospect themselves in the future a little bit. And it was fascinating because there was 100% match. So they were already, like configured in their mind for this job or for this industry. So maybe it was the result of self-selection, that they say, I have the right set of capabilities and the right opinion on this, and then I will go for it. Or maybe it's the other way around. But it's a very interesting question. We should go deeper into its side in our research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will pick another question, which is addressed to all three panelists, so that will give the opportunity to the three of you to react to it. So from Mary, what do you see is the most important insight from behavioral science we should take forward to improve safety? And that safety question comes back quite often on the chat. So should we start with Tom? I mean, we'll go with the order of speakers. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that's quite hard to answer, really, because there's so many great insights from behavioral science. I think probably I think it's the fact that behavioral science really is very good in getting better at predicting behavior, and all those things I was talking about earlier, whether it's around data science or experiments or using culture as a predictor of behavior. It's getting very good at predicting behavior in specific contexts. So not just behavior on average, but behavior in different contexts and situations. And I think that, and one of the very powerful aspects of behavioral science is the data side of things. And I think there's so much data available in the aviation industry around behavior in certain safety critical moments and incident data and the likes. And I think some of that can be pulled together to start to get more of an insight on predicting behavior. So that's probably it.
Thank you very much. Carmen, do you want to respond to that question as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm going to be brief, talking about behavior. And something that you should keep in mind is sometimes human beings are unexpected. So we can predict, but sometimes expect the unexpected. Because I try to sometimes to make people understand that it's one person, one story, and sometimes is the person that is interviewing that have to adapt to the other person, and you should be flexible. So with a real open mind, and just a final thing is regarding artificial intelligence, because sometimes from the industry, they are trying to push and to press to just, okay, I have a perfect tool, so you can use it in your, for instance, to detect deception, and we are not on that point yet. So just be careful with those that tells you that I have the perfect tool to solve all your problems with, for instance, deceptive people. So just that's why.
Thank you. So tools should be human-centered as well, and I think it's important to keep the human being at the center of all the great technological improvements that are happening. Victor, your insights on behavioral science and safety. So what would be the key one according to you?
Well, it's difficult to add something to both Carmen and Tom, but from my job experience, it is the flexibility that a human has, and you have to train machines to arrive at that same level, and that's very, very difficult, as we've seen on the Hudson, United Airlines on the Hudson. No computer would go for that solution. That was AI experts told me that time, and so I think this is something that behavioral science can bring in, and this is also important for machine learning. The knowledge that we gained in behavioral sciences is applied to machine learning, of course. So we feed the machine learning industry with our knowledge.
Thank you so much. It's a little bit frustrating to have to stop the conversation there. You know, we're reaching the end of our time together, and I would like to take the few remaining seconds to sincerely and warmly thank our speakers. Also thank our colleagues from the UNIN, you know, for the opportunity to have this session, and my colleagues Kieran, Kilzaris, and Alec for their support in putting this together. As I said, I mean, we hope to see you in a few months from now to continue the conversation on behavioral science in aviation. And yes, you're all invited to the ICAO Innovation Fair. And thank you so much for the very interesting comments as well in the chat. See you all and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.